My name's Kirsty Early. I'm the Digital Heritage and Engagement Officer here at the college, and I will be your host for this evening. So you're welcome, I guess. So first of all, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves before I go any further. So Marvin.
Hi, I'm Marvin McElroy. I'm a consultant geriatrician at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, and I'm also Honorary Librarian of the college. On becoming Honorary Librarian, I wanted to explore the sort of pioneering women of our college, amongst several other things, as I'm sure Kirsty, Claire and Ross will testify to. And was just really getting into it when COVID struck. So I was sort of had a spark and looked at things. So I'm so pleased that Kristin's had been able to have this opportunity to look further into her archives. In spite of COVID, has managed to get into the college. I'm really jealous of that. Yeah, but I'm really looking forward to hearing Kristin's talk tonight and for the discussion afterwards. And I look forward to hearing anybody's questions as well. So over to Kristin now.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. So my name's Kristin. I'm a doctoral researcher in the history of health and medicine at the University of Strathclyde, primarily focused on women's reproductive health and rights. But over the past couple of months, I've had the absolute privilege of being the SAGSA research intern within the heritage team at the Royal College, and really do owe being here to Marvin, because if it hadn't been for her amazing research just before COVID, we wouldn't be doing this talk and we wouldn't be doing this event. So really, really great and excited to be here as well.
Thank you very much, guys. So before we head to Kristin's talk about her research and her work at the college, I just want to give a brief overview of what the Reframed series of events has been like and what it's been about, especially if this is the first one you've attended. So our Reframed events have been a new series of engagement events where we look at our heritage in new ways, through a different lens. History itself isn't always a comfortable thing, and through these events, we aim to address issues of equality, diversity, and inclusion. We're reframing our heritage by acknowledging that race and gender equality is embedded in our history, not only as a college, but also as a nation. Heritage practice functions to connect people to the past, but often ignores the controversial parts of the story, such as inequalities. So we've been looking at a lot of different parts of our heritage, from Joseph Lister to David Livingstone to anatomical textbooks. And tonight we're looking at gender inequality, specifically in how the college has been run through history. So gender inequality and prejudice against women is very evident in the college's history, especially when looking at the college's minutes, which Kristin has been looking at inside out for the past wee while. So these minutes date back to 1602. So she's got a lot of years to go through. And they detail all the goings on in the college, being a massive part, an important part of our archive collection. And they give a really unique insight into the history of inequality and sexism in the college. But I don't want to steal away from any more of Kristin's talk. So just want to say, in 2021, we want to look more closely at the context of this heritage, not shy away from it. We want to discuss it and we want to reframe it. So now I am going to stop talking and going to hand over to Kristin now. Thanks.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you so much again, everybody, for coming along today. I'm delighted to be speaking at the Reframed event, and alongside as well the brilliant Marvin and Kirsty. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you the research that I've been working on as part of my internship around the topic of gender inequality within the college's history. Today, I will be discussing the ways in which women were admitted, firstly as fellows, and then, firstly as members, sorry, and then as fellows of the then titled Faculty of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this talk, though, we will also examine how the faculty utilised their history and traditions to justify the enduring gender disparity within their ranks in an attempt to curate their own professional identity through the late Victorian period, leading us to think about the purpose and usage of heritage in the past, and as Kirsty so eloquently explained, in the present. The Reframe series has often been a rare and valuable opportunity to pose more questions than answers, and I am taking full advantage of that ethos today. This research is still a work in progress. It's only 2 months old. And I look forward to hearing from you all in the subsequent discussion. So in finding a good place to start to really situate all of this, I would like to share with you this anecdote from a faculty meeting on the 1st of July 1878. And I would ask you to keep in mind that date as well for a couple of moments. In 1878, a minute note was made concerning a woman referred to as Miss Taff of Kelvinside, who requested permission to enter the preliminary examination of the Faculty of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. Passing this exam would qualify her for a medical licence and the ability to practice medicine. While Doctors Henry Muirhead and James Morton felt that the request be granted, Doctors Robert Perry, the ex-president, and John Coates supported the contrary motion to decline her request for examination, referring to an earlier decision made concerning another woman's application in 1873 that, quote, as the faculty do not grant their licence to women, they decline to admit them to any of their examinations. And of course, this is not an uncommon response. Throughout the 19th century, the medical profession in Britain went through a transformative period of legitimisation. Prior to this, trained medical men struggled to distinguish their practice within a pluralistic and intersecting medical marketplace made up of physicians, surgeons, apothecaries, chemists and druggists, and a range of irregular practitioners and alternative healers, many of which who were involved in itinerant quack medicine. And we can see this demonstrated by a famous expression that I'm showing you right now by Thomas Ronaldson, entitled, quote, death is an apothecary's assistant. And I think this really epitomises the attitudes towards the medical profession as a whole at this time. Centuries of attempting to regulate and professionalise medicine culminated in the Medical Act of 1858, which established the medical register and created a standard of education and examination. Although the Medical Act successfully distinguished highly trained practitioners from the dangerous quacks, it simultaneously delegitimised a number of similarly highly skilled female practitioners by limiting their access to medical education and examination to the universities and medical corporations, none of which were open to women, meaning they could not be licensed under the medical register. The only exclusion to this was Elizabeth Blackwell, pictured here, who had a medical degree from a foreign university at the time and was thus the only woman to be entered into the medical register in 1859. In the 10 years that followed, only one woman would become registered, and that would be Elizabeth Garrett Anderson. Yet in 1876, 1876, an amendment was made to the Medical Act which stated that, quote, the powers of every body entitled under the Medical Act to grant qualifications for registration shall extend to all persons without the distinction of sex. Thus, medicine became one of the earliest professions to allow women entry, meaning that by 1878, when Miss Taff applied to the faculty for examination, women were able to become medical practitioners and medical corporations could grant them licenses. So, how did the faculty justify her exclusion? Despite having the right in law to become medical practitioners, women still continued to face institutional barriers to a career in medicine in the second half of the 19th century. The faculty's continued exclusion of women was justified by the fact that it was not mandatory to admit women following the Enabling Act of 1876, making women's entry into medicine wholly dependent on the goodwill and sympathies of male-dominated medical corporations and universities. So, not mandated by law, the process by which women gained entry into the faculty was consequently highly individualistic and entirely dependent on the culture and attitudes within the faculty itself. In 1886, in cooperation with the Royal Colleges of Physicians and of Surgeons of Edinburgh, the faculty permitted women into their conjoint diploma, or triple qualification, which, when passed, enabled them entry into the medical register and therefore a licence to practice. The TQ was, until the 1890s, the only means for women to gain entry into the medical profession in Scotland. And incidentally, the TQ remained an important qualifier until 1993. Among the first female licentiates of the faculty was Alice Jane Shannon Kerr, whose name is shown here in the TQ examination register. By the end of the 1880s, only 7 of the 19 medical authorities enabled women into their qualifying examinations, and that includes the 3 medical corporations in Scotland. So, on the surface, it does appear that the faculty were proactive and utilising their licensing powers in favour of the admission of women. Nevertheless, as is so often the case in history, it would be negligent to suggest that the faculty was in favour of female medical practitioners. Although one of the earliest medical authorities to admit women, the faculty remained hostile towards what they explicitly considered to be radical attempts by female practitioners to pursue a viable career in medicine. Prior to the Enabling Act of 1876, they actually petitioned against the bill in the House of Commons, arguing that, quote, it would be unjust and partial legislation and opposed to the spirit of the Medical Act, showing their early hostility towards the inclusion of women within the profession. But the most significant example of their attitudes revolved around the issue of female fellowship. Between 1897 and 1910, 2 women applied to the faculty fellowship. Elizabeth Adelaide Baker, who's shown on the left, who was a student at the Edinburgh School of Medicine for Women and a licentiate of the faculty, and Dr Jessie McLaren McGregor, shown on the right, except she's the woman on the left, one of the first women to receive an MD from Edinburgh University. Officially, both Baker and McGregor were refused entry based on a purported legal technicality which excluded women from sitting so-called post-registrable examinations. However, analysis of the discussion around female fellowship shows that the admission of women was bound up in issues of professionalisation, identity, and a strong gender bias against female physicians. Fellows at this time could be office bearers and had increased voting rights and privileges within the faculty. They were thus more visible within the faculty hierarchy and the wider medical community. The identity of the faculty, expressly defined as male, meant that attempts by women to gain more senior titles within the medical body was seen as a threat to the overall prestige and reputation of the faculty. In 1892, 4 years before Baker's proposal, the issue of admitting women to the fellowship was raised by Dr John Monro. In response, however, the clerk of the faculty said, quote, I do not think any legal objection intervenes to the admission of women, but having regard to the interpretation of the faculty's powers under its charter of erection, drawn from immemorial and consistent on invariable practice, and to the whole tenor and phraseology of its regulations, I entertain grave doubt as to the competency of making so radical a change on a constitutional point. This shows that the faculty were hesitant to admit women as fellows, not because of the law, but rather it threatened to imbalance the ecosystem wherein the faculty functioned. Following Baker's application for the fellowship, the faculty consulted with top lawyers G.B. Balfour and David Dundas in a memorial for the opinion of counsel, in which they further recognised the legal ambiguities of women becoming fellows. Despite this, the faculty ultimately interpreted the law in their predetermined favour, arguing that they did not have the legal power to approve female fellowship. In the 20-page memorial that was created and read by fellows and members of faculty, it was also argued that, quote, the terms of the original charter appear to us exclude the view that women could competently have been admitted to the rights and duties of those persons whom the fellows of modern days represent. Women, while no doubt they might be entitled upon examination, were not eligible among the brethren. Here, we see the use of the faculty's heritage and legacy being used as a justification for their continued exclusion of female practitioners, alongside what was a prejudiced and narrow reading of the law surrounding medical practitioners who were women. To be clear, the faculty were taking at face value the gendered language of a charter enacted in 1599, which in the same memorial they themselves acknowledged as open to interpretation and change. A great example of this is that fellows did not exist until 1850 and are not mentioned in the original charter. This is the tenor and phraseology then emphasised by the clerk in the earlier discussion, which purportedly limited women's engagement with the faculty. Further examples of this occur throughout the faculty's discussion of female fellowship, as the historic competency of female healers was also evoked. stating that, quote, in the original charter, it is clearly indicative of the male sex as being those alone concerned with the privileges and duties of the faculty, and that, quote, cognizance was not infrequently taken of female practitioners, but in such cases it was to inhibit or discharge them from practicing. The fact that the faculty historically excluded women from practicing medicine due to their quote unquote incompetency further shows how the faculty used its past actions as a justification for the present. This use of history by the faculty emphasises a well defined relationship between heritage and identity, and the ways in which legacy and tradition were employed as a means of resisting diversification. Whilst the faculty were accepting of the granting of licenses to women in collaboration with other medical corporations, it was not interested in aligning itself with the cause of women in medicine. That being said, just over a decade later, the faculty would admit its first female fellow in Yemeni Sen, and we'll hear more about her shortly. But the crucial issue here is that the law regarding female health professionals did not change between the faculty's legal refusal of Baker and their admission of Sen. So then, what changed between 1897 and 1912 which helped to sway the opinions of faculty? Well, although the turn of the century was a jovial period for the faculty, celebrating their 300th anniversary, as well as receiving the prestigious title of Royal Faculty of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, the role and function of medical authorities in Britain as a whole was in decline. Membership and fellowship admissions declined as universities became more accessible. There was also dissent within the faculty itself, as members argued that it was elitist and out of touch with the everyday Glaswegian practitioner. As the 1900s rolled on, the faculty was in desperate need for reform. Concurrently, by the end of the century, women could gain a medical education through the Glasgow and Edinburgh universities, and more female practitioners were entering the medical register. Furthermore, the Royal College of Surgeons of England had amended its rules to admit women to the fellowship exam, admitting their first female fellow in 1911. So, as previously stated, the law regarding female medical practitioners did not change. However, the culture and climate within and around the faculty had. Consequently, in 1910, Dr. Annie Louise McElroy, the first woman to graduate with an MD from Glasgow University, and latterly the first female professor of medicine in the UK, wrote to the faculty pleading for women to be permitted to the Fellows exam because it was, quote, necessary for the holding of teaching posts. And the council approved her request, with very minimal but still some opposition. And it finally enabled women the opportunity to enter the Fellow examination. The following June, Yemeni Sen was admitted as a fellow qua surgeon. Sen was a licentiate of the University of Calcutta and a recipient of the Lady Dufferin Fund, which was usually given to white British women travelling to India for work, despite being established to support female health professionals in colonial India. She was also the court physician of the royal family in Nepal and managed the Kathmandu Zenana Hospital, speaking to her prestige and prowess in medicine. However, unlike her male contemporaries, she was unable to hold office or stand in faculty elections, showing again the endurance of inequalities faced by women in medicine. So, as I said at the start of this presentation, I don't really have conclusions so much as I have further food for thought. I've traced the history of women's entry into the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow and emphasised that despite the enactment of purportedly progressive legislation, institutional and cultural barriers to women in medicine continued throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. More often than not, this was bound together with the perceived legacy, prestige, and identity of medical corporations as being overwhelmingly male dominated. Today, gender disparities still affect women in medicine, which is further exacerbated through the intersection of class and race. Yet change has also occurred, and no better way exemplified by the appointment of Professor Jackie Taylor as President of the College in 2018, and indeed as Marvin as Honorary Librarian. Women's historic engagement with the college raises questions about the role of heritage and tradition in both hindering and improving EDI, and grants us the opportunity to contrast the experiences of female healthcare providers in the past with those in the present. And with that, I look forward to hearing your thoughts and the thoughts of my fellow speakers in the ensuing discussion. Thank you so much, and I'll stop presenting now.
Thank you so much, Kristin. That was, I'm sure I'll be speaking on behalf of everyone, that was a very interesting and in-depth presentation just about just the college's response to women. I feel like if you had infinite time, Kristin, you would just be like, okay, that's the college. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next. Let's see what everyone else was doing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
No, and it's been an absolute joy working with you as well. And because as a team, and I'm sure Marvin will say the same, we've had very little time to look into this before, even before COVID, as Marvin mentioned before, we were just getting into it. And then the pandemic happened. So having you here has actually really opened all of our eyes to what exactly was going on. So yeah, I just want to reiterate to the audience that they can ask questions. So far we don't have any in, as far as I can see in the chat. So if they want any questions, feel free to ask them. But also I have some planned here as well, so don't worry about that. So I wanted to start just with in this discussion a bit of background like the bit before your presentation, Kristin, before all the acts were coming in. I think people could listen to this talk or look at this subject and be like, oh yeah, women didn't really practice medicine before this. But was that the case? Were there women actually practicing? You could go back so many centuries and have a look, but or was it just that it was very male dominated most of the time?
No, you're absolutely correct. When it comes to women in medicine, women have always played a very significant role within the medical profession. And what we see in the 19th century really is this kind of effort by physicians, and most notably male physicians who had that access to university education, really trying to create their own profession and get their profession legitimised. And within that is creating an identity. And at this time, it's very much overwhelmingly male dominated. And also, it's worth saying as well, very much British.
Yeah.
British white upper class male who was able to go to university and learn Latin and all of these things. But women have been healers since time immemorial, and very effective healers. And I think that's something that we've really spoke about in trying to dispel, is that women have always practiced medicine. At this point, though, this is when they start to get excluded, and then they have to re-enter the profession.
So do you think that the Medical Act that was introduced, this is me kind of going freestyle here, so I apologise, I'm really keeping you on your toes. Do you think it was a deliberate thing to not include women?
Don't know if it was a deliberate thing as much as they just didn't consider women. And again, the Medical Act actually doesn't have a distinction of sex in terms of, it doesn't say women are excluded. It does use kind of gendered language at times, but it isn't necessarily that they are getting legally excluded. It's again this interpretation of the law, and it's the fact that the corporations and the universities refuse to admit women. But for instance, the Medical Act specifically states that it doesn't include the chemists and druggists. So they do include certain people and exclude other people. But yeah, it's not an intention, but it's also not an attempt to make anything equal either.
Yeah, almost lazy, one would say.
Yes.
Dare I say. So Marvin, I'm going freestyle here, and I wanted to give you give you this question as someone who's very much within the medical profession and very much within the college. And you've done research as well in the college minutes and the documents Kristin was talking about. How did that feel as a woman and someone who's part of the college, to see the college's response to women trying to get admitted?
So I think part of it was initially feeling really excited about finding these documents. I think part of it was you're overwhelmed because you're like, wow, we have this legal document. This is amazing. I must read this. So part of it was reading it. And then you just get a bit annoyed and a bit angry because, it goes, I will put this one point across. Secondly, thirdly, fourthly and fifthly, sixthly, and then I think it was the seventh point was the brethren point that Kristin was talking about, underlined in bold. You're like, oh wow. So the excitement was then taken over by an anger, I guess.
Yeah.
So is that the ultimate point is, though, it was good to get it out in the open and look at it and discuss it and get people like Kristin to look further and see what else was in the general context, because I think it's really important, as I've said in other events before, to look at the context at the time and not look at it purely through our eyes. So the context is key here. And I think you're right, Kristin, round about the sort of passive way the act was put in. You know, it didn't say either way, so it was open to interpretation. So I think that was really important too. So very excited and then slightly annoyed, I think, is it fired me up to look further, which is why we then looked at all of the other parts of what we're doing. So, you know, it was a sort of initial excitement is definitely the first thing, as I said.
Was that the same with you, Kristin, when I mean, you got access to the archives, even during the current pandemic, you were able to go in. So was there that excitement and also frustration as well? I feel like that must be just hand in hand in your field of study.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely the first feeling was, oh my goodness, I am in an archive for the first time in over a year. I think when you take archivist or historian archive access away, we tend to melt a little bit. So I was very thrilled to be in. But yes, I think the interesting thing about the faculty is they're not explicitly they're not aggressive in their language in terms of how they exclude women, but what they are is they are calculated and very they almost find this like ironclad response, which then they themselves just abandon, because they truly nothing changes between that big massive legal document that says because women can't be brethren, they can't be practitioners. Nothing changes between that time, but that often makes it more insidious, and it makes it more difficult for women to argue against. Whereas when you see the case of Sophia Jex-Blake, where there's a riot in the Surgeons' Hall, that's something that you can quite easily argue against. So this sort of more subtle regulation and rules, that sort of like institutional framework, it's harder to decipher, but it also makes it more difficult. And the other thing is that there's, as much as we are learning about women within the college's history, because there wasn't a conscious effort to preserve their history and their work, you don't see a lot of works authored by women as well in the archive. Even what we know has still been written by a man. So that adds another layer as well, which I think is quite interesting.
I think also, as we were talking about the absence, as you're saying, Kristin, the absence of the absence of the discussion from women, the letters, you know, we were talking about, you know, Louisa McElroy's letters, and we can't find the letters. So the absence of those sort of things is really important too, to note and make a mark of, definitely.
That kind of goes to one of the other questions, how a lot of archival material, especially in the United Kingdom, it was curated and created by white upper class men. So how do you go about, you're talking about the things that are missing, you know, what do you do with that when you're trying to research women's history? How do you locate the women, and, you know, how can we I don't want to say fix this, because, you know, these have been preserved for a reason, but how can it be remedied? To either of you, sorry.
Well, Kristin might know better, but from an archive point of view, actually, because we didn't have the opportunity to look through them as much as we'd like to before COVID, actually some of it was quite easy. I think, Kristin, you said it was all indexed about women, so some of it has actually been indexed well. But if you don't know where to look, so I guess time, and then sometimes going down a certain route to find what you're looking for. So we had some dates. So we knew some dates already because of the work that had been done in some of the previous books on the college. So we knew certain dates to look for, and then you can always look round about those dates. But I think part of it was that was in the index of some of the archives, wasn't it, Kristin, that you found that I hadn't seen, and I think it's a time and then opportunity to look. But I'm not wanting to detract from your amazing work, sorry, but I think it was round about just having the time and the access.
No, absolutely. Like, I think sometimes it can just go down to time and availability, and there not being a pandemic. That would also be a quite good thing.
That would be great.
But there is also something to be said about, and again, I keep saying this in our meetings, but I think it's just such a great word, and reframing how we look at archive material. And I hate to be that person using the word of the series, but it is such an important way, like, and looking at who is included and excluded in documents, instead of drawing to the conclusion that they weren't there, instead thinking, okay, so they weren't in the room. And the people who create these minute books, and the people who are preserving certain letters that they think is significant, they do not have a diverse viewpoint in mind. They don't think, oh wow, it would be really amazing if we could take a photo of the first female fellow. That's not something that they focus on. So it's about seeing, okay, if there's a rule in the regulations which refers to gentlemen, that's women are present there. They're present by their absence. I think is something that I'm really passionate about doing. And Morven's absolutely spot on as well. A lot of it was just going page by page through those really such rich archive material in the faculty minutes. I mean, there was so much just about the kind of medical culture in Glasgow at that time, which as a medical historian I was so thrilled by as well. But it's about going page by page and just trying to find that occasional time that they reference a miss, really. More than anything else.
As you said, which is also telling about the absence, and it's so that is the thing, and so they're just not in the room, as you said. So I think the other thing is, so it is a kind of excitement when you do find something, because it is so rare. It's at points in time, so it's that sort of thing where you're like, why am I excited about this? this should have been documented. So yeah, it's round about just that is too, isn't it? I think I do get excited still, though. I mean, I can't help it.
Oh, absolutely. Claire was there. Claire was there when I found the information about Louise McElroy, and I literally just like went and then she went and ran to the medical register for me, and it was a very exciting moment for everyone involved. A socially distanced, exciting moment.
Yeah, you have to get that in there so that they don't come knocking on our door. And it is true, Kristin uses the word reframed all the time. And it's like, it always reminds me of the, when you're watching a film and they say the title of the film in the thing, they're like, oh, they said the title. So to kind of go on to our part, the triple qualification, how important was that for getting this equality? For women, and just, well, how important was it for the medicine in general, really?
Well, the triple qualification, this is a bit slightly boring chat, but the triple qualification enabled you to get experience as a physician and a surgeon. So it was part of the prerequisite that you did some experience in surgery and medicine. So from that point of view, it was a good qualification to have. It did encourage women, so it did allow access to medicine for women when they didn't have access, but also we can't detract, the triple qualification also helped other people become practicing in medicine in the UK as well, which was really important too. So not only did it help women, it helped other people from abroad. So it helped lots of different people across the years, and so I think it was important, but not just for women. Maybe has a different viewpoint, but I think it was an important way of entry into medicine for women, but others as well.
Yep. Absolutely, I would agree. In fact, like the TQ wasn't created to make portals of entry more accessible into medicine. It was again kind of serendipitous and inadvertently good for women, and also for people who couldn't access the universities through financial reasons, and people who are coming, throughout the British Empire, which is very much alive at this time. But yeah, the TQ is very much a kind of panic move almost between the Royal Colleges in Edinburgh and the faculty, who at this time are kind of, again, sort of struggling to figure out where they're going to be placed within this new medical profession and this new pecking order. So they almost panic, and they go, right, we'll join together and create this TQ, and that means that we won't get reformed by the GMC and so on and so forth. So again, it's that sort of professional and identity panic that forwards us this. But it really increased the numbers of women dramatically. I think by about 8%, like by 1910, 8% of the women, of people going through the TQ were women, which is a great statistic. I mean, it's not a great statistic, but for the time, it's an incredible
It's a
statistic.
great statistic for the time.
Yes.
And especially if you look into, just for the audience, if you look into some of the first registered women in the UK, not some of the first medical women in the UK, but registered, a lot of them did go through the TQ. A lot of them did go through the triple qualification, and that was their way in. It was almost like, even though it wasn't a loophole anymore, it was almost like another loophole for them, because again, they were still fighting a lot of stigma. To throw in another question, which you both are loving, was it easy after they qualified? Was it easy, as in career wise?
I think the honest answer is no. The first women who got the triple qualification, though, a lot of them did go to do missionary work.
Yeah.
So, if we look at, I haven't looked at them all fully again for a while, but quite a lot of them did go and do missionary work in India and elsewhere. So actually they went abroad. But well, Alice Kerr, the first licentiate, female licentiate, she actually mainly was based down in Merseyside, and a suffragette, and as you know, as I've told you many a time, but maybe the audience don't know, spent time in Holloway, for her suffragette sort of acts. So she did have a hard time as a suffragette as well as a doctor. So I think that the sort of missionary work was quite an active thing for the TQ female doctors. But Kristin might have. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Kristin. I guess I'll come in there.
No, again, I completely agree. It was incredibly difficult for women after they qualified and after they entered the medical register. We see that in the fellowship, which was so necessary in terms of getting any more senior roles and positions in hospitals. And there was also at this time this kind of wider crisis within the medical profession where they are concerned about there being too many doctors, which, I mean, in my opinion, you can never have too many doctors. And that was, again, another reason for them refusing to admit women, because they thought that would really, again, increase the competitiveness of the field. And absolutely, they do travel. They largely don't operate in the UK because of that hostile environment where they really just can't get a viable career. So they do end up traveling to the colonies and to places like India, where then you do have this uncomfortable relationship where white British born women are going over to India where there are trained female physicians, and there is this sort of superiority complex that's at play, as you can imagine. So that's why I think it's just so incredible that Yemeni Sen, who was Bengali born, who was studied at the University of Calcutta, got the Lady Dufferin Fund, which was not, it was a really important thing, but it was more often than not swayed towards Western women. And then she became our first female fellow, and I think that her gender and her race is such a significant part of who she was. And it's amazing that in spite of everything, she managed to do that.
Definitely, definitely. So I'll quickly go to some of the questions that we've received from the audience. So first of all, from Sarah. So she says, thanks, Kristin, for the talk. And she says, have you come across any documents written by these or similar women doctors, letters, diaries, publications, around this, as in around gender inequality? And have you come across their own words?
Oh, thank you for that question, Sarah. I can so tell it's from you. The answer is no. So even the letter by Louise McElroy, it's copied in the minute note, and I think there's something really interesting about the fact that it's written by a man, and then it has like signed, and then it has her name, and it has her like it has her postnominals there as well. But even then, they still call her Miss McElroy, and it's like she's quite clearly a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So there is absolutely this like weird dynamic between women submitting these letters and those letters getting taken away, but the minute notes including the
Mm-hmm.
copy of it. I think there's something really interesting in that. We have discussed that maybe at some point there was a letter book which got disappeared, but that's one of the joys of doing archive work, is you can hypothesize all you want about what should or could have been there. At the end of the day, we have what we have. I'm still like not satisfied though. Like I'm certain they're somewhere. So if you ever see me in the basement of the Royal College, long
At
after my
night.
internship, I do apologise because I would just love to find that there. And but it is, I think it is important to recognise that these faculty minutes are still they're written by men. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Marvin, have you come across anything yourself?
So there's some written books written round about the subject of early women in medicine. So there's some sort of ideas and thoughts around certain pioneering women, but that's it. We haven't found anything else really, I don't think, in our archives, if that's what we're talking about. But there's some really good books round about the first women medics that are worth a read, if anyone is interested.
And some of them also did their own publications as well, isn't that right, Marvin, around women's health?
Yeah. Oh, so you see, you're asking me about Alice.
Yeah, come on.
So
I
I
want
think
to know about Alice.
I know. So Alice Kerr, she's actually born up north in Deskford, and and as I said, mainly practiced down in the Wirral, sort of Merseyside. But she did publish a book on womanhood, a book for every woman.
Great
Motherhood,
title.
a book for every woman.
Yep.
Which basically takes women through the journey from being a girl through puberty, motherhood or not. And it was quite interesting because part of her quote was round about, motherhood is not I'm misquoting her now, but the epitome for every woman to become a mother. And this is really kind of quite interesting stuff in the late 1890s when it was published. And I've only seen one copy of that book down in the British Library when I went down in November 2019. It was pre-COVID, so 2019. And I really want a copy of that book because
So if you see Marvin in the basement of the British Library, then don't tell anyone.
So it's a beautiful book. It's well written, and I took some photographs of some of the pages, so that I had some information. But yeah, it's quite a rare book, and that's my mission in life, is to find a copy of it. But yeah,
put that out to the audience.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing book of its time, and even it was reviewed in journals at the time, and it was very well thought of in the journals of the time as well, which is quite an interesting part of that, I think.
To go on to the next question from Holly, have you come across any responses / correspondences that show attitudes towards women's participation in the trip qualification?
So there are some entries in the council minutes round about the admission of women to the licentiate, I think is what the title is down the side. And there are a few mentions of it. Again, I haven't been able to access them. I don't know if, Kristin, if you've had a look at those in the minutes. I can't quite remember what they say, but there are quite a few entries in sort of when the TQ starts in 1884 up until 1886, and there is a mention of Alice Kerr being admitted under the licence, I think, as well. But I don't know if there's anything else that you've got insight into.
Yeah, I think that is a really great question, Holly. So thank you so much. My short answer is we've not looked yet. So being completely perfectly honest, I think there might be some, especially in our William McEwen archive. We've got a really extensive William McEwen archive, and he was an examiner for the TQ and wrote like kind of sort of annual reports between 1890 to 1910, 1912. So I really want to look at them to see if there is any mention of women at that time, because I would be quite interested in seeing if they make note of that. There is some earlier moments, like for instance, they have this big party at the faculty one year, and they say like, oh, 200 men showed up and there were 6 lady doctors, and they're so excited that there's 6 lady doctors. And then, yeah, they're called lady doctors. So it's like, you know, all the wives were there and the lady doctors. There was 6 of them. So they do kind of recognise when there is women involved in the college and interacting within the college. And I think there might be something there, but that's the wonderful thing about this being a work in progress. I'll keep you updated and I'll let you know.
I really like Ross's comment about dedicated research and funding. So it's just to thank the funding for your research, Kristin, your internship. He's put that in the comments. I don't know if everyone's seen that.
No, absolutely. It was funding offered by SAGSA, and yeah, so grateful. It's so important that we have the time, the resources to do this. So yes, thanks, Ross.
We've had a question just come in from Claire. What happened after 1912, as in Yemeni Sen? Do we see a flood of applications for fellowship from women?
So I think we don't know quite the answer to that about applications of fellowship. And I think that's another good point from Kristin round about, I think we don't know that. We can see when women became fellows, because we have the fellows book, so we can see the entries there. So I don't know if there was a flood of applications, but we can see where people did become fellows, women did become fellows. Because I don't think there was another female fellow, I might be getting this wrong, until 1923, I think it was.
Yeah, it wasn't all like one every 10 years practically.
I think there was a gap, and then there's a few every sort of, I've got, I think from what I've looked at, because I haven't looked at the fellowship book since last year, I think it was 23, then 1930 maybe, and then 31. I'm going to plug the Royal. There's quite a few doctors from the Royal became doctors from the Royal became fellows, but yeah, it wasn't a flood. I'd hardly call it a flood, more a trickle.
Nice.
Of fellows, but I don't know about the applicants, and we haven't looked yet. So that's work in progress. Maybe we'll do another event, depending on.
Sign me up. Yeah, just to follow on from that, again, we don't have a great scope on that yet, and I say yet because we would really love to keep this project going, but there is an interesting, again, this sort of like juxtaposition, because the day that Yemeni Sen is admitted as a fellow, there is actually another application by a woman, and her name's on the top of my head, and I can't picture it, but she is actually refused, and she's refused because she hasn't been in practice for enough years, which is fair enough. Fair. But also they don't recognise her education, because she was educated in Dublin and was a licentiate in Dublin, which again, I find quite difficult to believe. Like they basically say that her education has not been satisfactory, despite the fact she's got her license and is practicing. So yeah, there. I think if we had the resources and the time to keep looking, and hopefully we will one day, I think you will see there being more women being included, and then or applying rather, and then being refused until a decade later, as Morvin said. But Morvin's got an amazing list of all the kind of women leading up to like the 1950s. I think it's just so, yeah, they're few and far between, but each woman is just so incredible in the work that they do.
So just to finish off with one more question before we conclude the event, today, has it gotten better? Is there more equality? So I'll say from a personal note, in my past life, from when teaching, medicine and dentistry and stuff, there were certain things that would be said in the anatomy room, that certain specialties were not equal in gender. For example, like more men went into certain surgery, or women were more likely to go to general practice because then they could have a family. That was just kind of commonplace. So do you think it has gotten better with regards to gender equality for women in medicine and surgery?
So I think yes is the answer, but I think it is a work in progress. So if you're looking at from a medical school point of view, so there's 50-50, a bit more than women than men coming into medicine, but still we have like a disparity in who then becomes a consultant. Now, you might argue or not, but a consultant. So I think in general surgery, or sorry, surgery in general, not just general surgery, surgery in general. So of all the surgical specialties, about 14% of consultants are women.
Oh, wow.
So that's the most up-to-date figures from 2020.
That's like a 4% improvement from the last time I heard the statistics, because it used to be 9 to 10.
Some of the specialties are slightly not as good as others, so that balances out. So, like for example, orthopedics is about 7% of consultants are women. Physicians do a bit better. We've got 36% female consultant workforce, which is definitely an improvement from even 20 years ago when I looked. Yeah, so the numbers of doctors in the UK are probably about the same. So it's, I think 47% of doctors are female. So that's everyone, like of all doctors in the UK, 47 are female. But there's still work in progress, I think, to get some the parity. And I think still women are underrepresented in sort of more like medical, political leadership posts. So that's still work in progress as well, although we've had significant advances in that all over the UK in recent years as well. So I think it's work in progress. Still got a bit to go.
And Kristin, what would you say as a historian?
Yeah, a different perspective, of course, from Morven's personal experiences. And that statistic is just so sobering as well, Morven, the 14%, that's incredible. But no, I would say there's definitely still more to be done. Of the physicians that I've had the joy of speaking to through this internship and also through like oral histories that I've done in the past, there is still this issue of pay disparity of senior positions, of childcare, that balance, that work-life balance that we've been striving for so long just kind of doesn't exist in the medical field. So women still have to choose between that sort of family and career progression. That continues to be a major issue. And I think it is nice to look back and to kind of go, okay, so we have, came from such a dark place to such a great place. But it also is good to think about what more can be done and how we can, includes more working class women and women of color and as well, like into that too. Because I'm sure if we looked at the statistics of those intersections, you would see that less and less women included. So absolutely, like there's such great progress has been made, but there's always more to be done.
There is always more to be done. Never a truer word. Well, I think that's all the questions. So I just want to take this time to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Morven and thank you to Kristin as well for your talk and for just such interesting discussions that we've had tonight. But again, I just want to say thank you to Morven and Kristin, and thank you to everyone who came along. I hope you have a nice evening, and if it's sunny where you are, definitely go out for a good walk.